Thank you so much, Rod. That was really good. All right, good afternoon, everybody. As Rod mentioned, this is my first time in Nebraska, and I'm going to pronounce it Kearney from here on. I'm not going to say Kearney to anybody else. I admit that I was mistaken in that, so hopefully you'll forgive me. I want to thank the organizers of the conference for having me here today. I hope as you all are digesting your lunch and thinking about what you ate, you'll also think a little bit about the parallels with technology and how we consume it, how we use it effectively. As you went through the buffet line, you made choices about what you wanted to put on your plate, and the way that we use technology and consume it is not that different. And I hope over the next hour you'll agree with me. For now, I need you to help with an experiment. I know that Rod polled the room and asked who here is a student or is attached to education in some way. I would love a vote of the students in the room. How many of them have a smartphone or a mobile device of some kind? Put up your hand. Okay. How many of you have permission from your parents to have one of those devices? Just about all of you. I see a couple. But so that's good because I need you to participate in this as well. So I need everybody to take out their smartphone, okay? Or cell phone, or mobile device, whatever it is, however you want to describe it, and hold it up for me, okay? So it's not a concert, you don't have to turn it on, it's not like you're like waving it back and forth. I see some people on the table back there, okay? Okay, now what I want you to do is to take it and pass it to the person next to you. Okay? Get to know somebody if you haven't met them before, introduce yourself. Now, it's funny because I can often hear the inner monologues that go on as this takes place, where it's like, "Don't judge my selfies." I just want to get to that next level of Candy Crush. I need my phone back. Did that email send? But part of the reason that I ask you to do that is because I want you to think about how you felt in that moment of literally handing your device off to somebody else. Maybe it was somebody you knew, maybe it was a total stranger, but I'm guessing you felt something, right? You felt either a little nervous, sort of anxious, worried. I don't want this to go out of my hand here. Some people have told me they feel a sense of relief because for just a couple of minutes you're like, get this thing away from me. On the other hand, I think that in just about every case, we worry about being without our device because it's so much to us these days. It's personal and professional. So people have heard the BYOD expression, so bring your own device to work. So increasingly workplaces are allowing you to have a personal device that's also a work device. I will tell you that I have that with Google. I don't have two different devices for work and for personal email and that kind of thing. I have one. And I'm sure many of you are increasingly like that as well. You use it to take pictures of your kids. I know I do. I think I probably take 100 pictures a day of my children. And to be separated from that is almost like giving up a piece of your body, a piece of you. So understandably, we all come to this with some sense of how much technology has become a part of our lives, what it means to us. And as you all think in some capacity, whether it's about broadband, how that connects people, whether it's people in rural parts of Nebraska or people in New York City where I live or around the world, this is the environment that we live in. This is the relationship we have with technology. And I am here to tell you, and as somebody who works at Google, obviously this is so important. This is about the evolution of communication and the workplace and everything else. But part of where I come from with all of this is thinking about it in a way that's meaningful and effective and doesn't overwhelm us. So I won't go through all the places where I worked and some of the places that I spent time. All of that, the reason that I sort of bring this up again, because Rod did a great introduction, is just to say that I have been following technology, been thinking about how technology fits into our lives for a pretty long time. So going back to the mid-90s, I did a master's degree in journalism, focusing in technology. I worked at all of these places thinking about technology, covering it. The problem is, at a certain point, and I would say it was probably about 2009, 2010, I realized that I thought that I was the most connected, cutting edge, early adopter that you could possibly imagine. I had every device. I was on every social network. I thought that I was available to people and communicating well. And I went home during the holidays at the end of 2009, and much of my family actually lives in Canada on the West Coast. And I was sitting with them over the holidays, and I was talking to my father, and he was telling me that he was going to get married again for the sixth time. That's a whole other story. But I should have known this. It shouldn't have taken being in person with him to find out. Why hadn't we discussed this in other ways? One of my friends, his girlfriend was pregnant, so the point is that it was an epiphany for me, a realization that I was what I thought was a terrific broadcaster, so lots of information going out, but a terrible communicator. And it was a bit of an awakening for me to think differently about the consumption of information, the sharing of it, how we all do that. And so that's what resulted in the book. These days I do work at Google. Just to be clear, I'm really not here in my sort of Google capacity. That said, I will talk about some of the things that we're working on at Google and how they align with this kind of philosophy. But what I ultimately did was think about a plan for me and how I needed to think differently about my own reliance on technology and how I use it, and hopefully it applies to other people. So I'm not here to sell books. If you never buy the book, that's fine. What I hope you take away from this is some piece of it that you can apply to your own life. And both personal and professional. So I think from a personal standpoint, it's pretty obvious why this matters. Many of us have families, we're traveling, we're overwhelmed at work. We want to think about not being bogged down, we feel tired, worn out, productivity goes down. But from a professional standpoint, a quick story, I had I was in Zurich, and there was a venture capitalist there who came up to me and told me this story, and he said, I had a young person, probably not much older than some of the students in this room, who came to me and said, I have this great idea. It's this app, it's going to change the world, as many people sort of think of their own project. And he said, I just need 1 million francs to get this off the ground. I can tell you more about it. What do you think? Do you want to discuss it further? And so this venture capitalist said, well, I need to know more. Let's go have lunch. We can talk about it and see where it goes. So during the course of this lunch meeting, and I'm sure many of us, we have these throughout the course of the day, but this young, very eager entrepreneur spent most of the lunch like this. Like, yeah, no, that sounds great. Just a second, I got to respond to this text. Anyway, and his attention was completely distracted the entire time. So at the end of it, he sort of followed up with his VC and he said, look, what do you think? What do you think of this idea? It's pretty awesome. And the VC said, if you can't give me an hour of your time to focus on what you're so enthusiastic about and so excited about, then I'm sorry, no, because I'm not going to invest in something if you can't tell me that you can be focused and really build this in an effective way and not be constantly distracted. So even when we think that technology is enabling us in a way to be more productive or to be more available or to be more connected, it can actually have negative consequences that we're not even aware of. So I tell you that as just kind of a precursor to what we're going to get into. So even though this is my first time in Nebraska, I have traveled a lot. I've been to more than 40 countries and 600 some cities, and I spend a lot of time on the road. And when I do that, I always like to see what in these local markets are people thinking about and how are they using technology perhaps to kind of help manage their technology. So there are a few examples here. I know these days most young people don't even talk on the phone. Actually, I'm not even going to make that assumption. How many young people here and students talk on their phone as much as they text or do other things? So still talking. Okay, pretty small percentage. Well, for you folks and for anybody else who feels like they talk too much on their phone, there is something called the cell phone wrist holder, which you strap on your wrist, and it will prevent any of that kind of almost carpal tunnel syndrome stuff you start to feel if you're talking on the phone too much. If you know somebody who needs one, $19.95. You see they come in pink. I think they're also in blue. On the bottom here, you see this young gentleman who is able to look at his phone lying in bed, and hands-free. So he can just lie there, watch a movie, whatever he wants to do without having to hold it, which we all know can be really uncomfortable. And on the top left here is something called the Hoyo. I have no idea why it's called the Hoyo, but it's up on Kickstarter now if you want to help to fund it. And this is for people who can't be without their phone, even in the shower. So if you fall into that category, and I don't even want to know about the selfie applications for this sort of thing. By the way, that's not part of their marketing strategy, I should be clear. They say this is a way to listen to your music while you're in the shower, okay? So fine. Then there is also this one, which I love. This is called the No Phone. So I know it looks like just a piece of plastic without anything on it, and that's because it is. And you see some of the testimonials there. And the idea is it's meant for people who feel a sense of anxiety when they don't have their phone with them, if they need to put it away and kind of eliminate some distractions. But if you feel down into your pocket and you don't feel it, your heart starts to speed up, this will alleviate that. So you can sort of feel like your phone is there, and you're like, oh, my phone is, oh, phew, I've got my phone. But not worry about actually having to communicate with anybody, because there's no way to do that. In fact, if you see here, it's battery-free, which I think is great. We're all struggling to keep our devices charged. There are no upgrades necessary. For anybody who uses Android and so on, you got to constantly keep upgrading it and updating it with different OS. You can drop it, you can probably step on it, it'd be fine. Waterproof, and I think most notably at the bottom there, you see that it is toilet bowl resistant. How many people here would admit to having dropped their phone in the toilet? See? So, maybe there's a marketplace for this kind of thing. Waterproof cases. All right. So, that's kind of a jokey aside. But so how fast is all of this happening, and where are we adopting smartphones in different parts of the world? I know there's a lot of information to digest on this graphic. If you want to kind of hone in on, I think what matters, the yellow color bars refer to smartphone adoption. And if you look at the list of countries there, at the top are ones that you may not have assumed would be up there. So places like Indonesia, the Philippines, China, Brazil, Vietnam, and then you see the US comes in at about number 6. And so places that we might refer to as emerging markets, or even places where you think they may not have great cell phone connectivity or broadband infrastructure, they are really sort of skipping over and going very quickly into that marketplace. That said, there's still a big place for the television, which I think is interesting. I think a lot of folks a while ago predicted sort of the demise of television and that everybody was going to start going to smaller and smaller screens. And I'll get a little bit later into our behavior with consumption around these screens. Of course, we're doing a lot of multi-screening and that kind of thing. But I think that there's a big place for us to think about broadband in that market, smartphones, that there's kind of like an ecosystem there that all lives together in an interesting way. And just in terms of how fast this has happened, so I always like to use this photo as an illustration. On the top there you see 2005, that is Pope Benedict in Vatican City. And if you sort of eyeball it, you might see like 2 or 3 screens that people have in their hand. 2013, Pope Francis, just about everybody has got some sort of mobile device to capture the moment. Now, I ask you to think about, what does 2021 look like? Is it everybody still with lots of screens, or do you not see any screens because everybody's wearing them? Or are they in some other part of our body? And we'll talk a little bit about wearables and that kind of thing. So I think that there's a fascinating trend that's happening in a relatively short amount of time and affecting us in different ways. Of course, the reality is that most of our media consumption is not the sort of analog way that we used to think about it. It's done through screens in some way, mobile phones and tablets. Although interestingly, some of the data that's been coming out point to tablet sales as sort of plateauing a bit, partly because I think, and I know at least this is true in our house, that a tablet is almost seen like the television, where you don't necessarily feel the need to sort of upgrade it every 6 months, or even every 3 months or something, or even every year, because it kind of does everything that you want. Of course, the ecosystem within it, the apps and everything else is a big part of that, but it's a little different than how we think of our smartphones and even our laptops. For some reason, tablets don't quite have that same pull or tug for people to keep updating them. That could change. And then we'll talk a little bit about the difference between multi-screening usage and sequential usage, and how that's applying to devices and how we may start something on one screen and move to another. We may be on our laptop and maybe we move to our tablet or vice versa. So how does all this break down? And I want to say that some of this data comes from Google and Ipsos and elsewhere. I don't mean to make it seem like I went off and surveyed everybody about the devices that they use. But what you can see here is that the television, it does still have a pretty prominent place in our lives. And I understand this could vary depending on where you live and your family dynamic and the rest of it. But a lot of us do still see that as a centerpiece for what we do. Now, it could be a connected television. It could be, internet through the television. It could be people, doing all sorts of things just with the television. And then you see people do still spend a lot of time on laptops. And the breakdown, of course, what you do on there may be different. And then tablets, a little bit more time. And then smartphones, as much as we have them, consuming media or consuming information from them is not that high. Now that's changing. I mean, the number is going up pretty dramatically as people are adopting them, as speeds are going up and video is more a possibility and that kind of thing. I mean, all of this is evolving pretty quickly. And there are a couple of ways of thinking about multi-screening. Are we, or are you, if I would ask any of you to think about your own situation, are you starting out on one device? So maybe you go to make plan a trip, let's say, or you want to book a flight, okay? And you might start because it's convenient to pull out your smartphone and you start searching for best prices or an itinerary or a ticket or something like that. And then anecdotally, I feel like some people maybe don't complete the transaction on their smartphone because they feel like, I don't know, I can't read everything properly, I'm not sure which button to click on, I'm a little worried about it confirming my process. And so you might stop and then go over to your laptop, re-log in, and finish the process there. So there's kind of again, this sequential notion. You're not doing them at the same time. Conversely, with something like watching your favorite show, I mean, anybody watch the Royals A's game last night? Were a bunch of people? So I'm guessing that some of you, if you're a big fan or you kind of want to see what people are talking about online, you're not just in a sort of you're not just looking at the television. You might have your laptop out, you might have your tablet or your smartphone out. You're checking out stats, highlights. What are my friends saying on social media? What's trending? All those things are happening at the same time. And of course, as this goes on, people might be thinking of doing this for different activities. So you see here, people might start planning a trip on their smartphone, and then many of them move on to a PC, but far fewer of them actually go on to use a tablet. So it's kind of an interesting relationship that we have with these devices and when we use them for different activities, and when we feel comfortable doing something entirely on one of those devices, especially if it's something we feel like is important, like giving money to somebody, a business transaction, something like that. At the end of the day, though, what ends up funneling into all this, how do we do this? How do we use our devices? How do we stay connected, whether we're doing it multi-screen or sequentially or whatever it is? How do we do it in a way that doesn't completely ruin our social life and our professional life and our family life? So how many people are familiar with scenes like this, where we're heads down? How many people see the tops of their children's heads more than they see their faces often? Yeah. And so it sort of looks like something like this. And I think that what's interesting is, and I wish I could just poll the entire room full of young folks here, because you could be my test subjects. I love that you're all in one room. It's great. Because I think that often we sort of talk about the next generation as though they aren't in the same room. And I think it's great that they're all here. And I hope that all of you can have these conversations throughout the conference. Anecdotally, for me, and the young people in here can kind of gut check me on this, but I feel like there's a bit of a pushback between, let's call it my generation and a little bit younger. I'm in my 40s, and people who kind of came into this as a digital immigrant and got really excited about everything that was happening, and the prevalence of Wi-Fi and the ability to stay so connected, and I think we kind of rushed headlong into it and maybe didn't think so smartly about what this was doing to our lives and our sense of identity and everything around us. Whereas I think that, and I'm going to give you all credit for the young generation, you're being a little smarter about this and you're being a little bit more effective about it. Now, I'm not saying that's in every case, but my sense is that, and I hear this in different corners of the country, is that the young folks are being a little bit more, hey, I don't want to be like overwhelmed by this stuff. I'll do what I want to do online, but I also want to have my friends and go out and do this other stuff. So hopefully we can kind of move past some of this and that it doesn't turn into this, which is sort of like my biggest fear. I feel like a lot of us can relate to the bottom graphic perhaps more than anything else. And that we can think about, how do we manage this stuff effectively in a way that doesn't kill us, because I think that this is what's actually going on. There's a woman, here's a woman who dropped her phone, people died or trying to rescue her phone, and her. And this gentleman who actually jumped in front of a train trying to retrieve his phone. Now, I'm sure if you asked these people half an hour before all of this happened, would you jump in front of a train for your phone? Their obvious answer would be, of course not. No, never. But then they still do it, right? I mean, so what's going on here, right? I mean, this is what I sort of allude to in the book, and I won't get too much into it now because it's a lot of kind of deep neuroscience and that kind of thing. But the relationship that we have with our technology and the information that we get, there are a lot of parallels with food and how it makes us feel good and that kind of thing. But deeper than that, there's almost a dopamine kind of hit that we get when we get a message on social media, or somebody sends us an email, or we hear back from somebody we haven't heard from for a while. It really tugs at our psyche in a way that few other things can. And so I talk about like the spheres of relationships that we have. So if you all at your tables right now, this is your immediate sphere, right? Literally, well, not a sphere, but it's a circle. But these are the people who you're looking at, you're breathing this air, you're looking at them in the face. You can talk about anything you want with these people, well, not anything, but you know what I mean? They're right here. You can strategize, talk about the future of broadband, all that. It's great. At the same time, if you pull out your phone, now all of a sudden your sphere of people you can interact with, it multiplies almost infinitely, right? I mean, you could be messaging somebody in Australia, assuming they're up at, in the middle of the night or whatever it is. Like, you step out of this sphere that you're in. And that can be super advantageous and awesome. At the same time, it can be really unfortunate and have negative consequences, like with the gentleman who was trying to get his venture capital up and running. So thinking about how we kind of overlap with these spheres and where we relate with people is important, and being aware. I think if there's anything I can ask you to take away from today, it's awareness of what all of this is doing and managing it in a way that makes sense to you. Because much like with, I'll get to that in a second. But so at what point in our lives are we willing to be pulled out of those spheres or pulled off into something else, or lose track of whatever it is that we're doing? So this is a graphic that, how many people in the room are over 25? And proud of it. How many people are under 25? Okay, so actually, well, about a 50-50, 45-55 breakdown. So for the people who are over 25, you care about the blue line. For the people who are under 25, you're in the green category. And there are some similarities, but notably, this is when can you be interrupted by an electronic message of some kind. So I think that I don't ever want to be interrupted when I'm on the toilet. First of all, I just think that that's weird. But the one on the very end, I think, is most interesting in terms of a sort of an age or generational breakdown, because most people over 25 say, I just don't like interruptions. I'd rather focus on one thing. And I think it was Shane who was up here earlier was talking about creativity and focus and sort of getting things done, and I'll get a bit into that later. But some of the studies really talk to how not being interrupted, not being distracted, that ability to monotask, which I'll talk about later, can actually be more productive than people who think that they're doing more things when they've got 30 tabs open on their browser and everything else. So But the weirdest, well, the most sort of confusing one to me is this one, which I'm not going to ask people in the room to define this for me. I feel like your definition of sex is what comes into this, and we won't spend too much time on that slide. So how are technology companies and people in different organizations thinking about this stuff? And believe me, they are. There's an event called Wisdom 2.0, which is a conference that happens in different parts of the country. We've hosted it at Google. It's been in a lot of other places. There was expansion into Europe. And this guy named Soren Gordenhammer brings together luminaries from tech companies and CEOs and really influential folks, and puts them in the same room with Buddhist monks and people who are thinking about health and well-being. And it's this really interesting kind of cross-pollination that happens with technologists and information and faith and mindfulness and that kind of thing. We talk about all kinds of different things, but the bottom line is that there are ways that a lot of tech companies are thinking about how do we consume this information effectively. We know people have lots of choices. We know people have sort of a bit of a struggle with this. So one of those ways is through Google Glass, which I'm sure most of you have either heard about or tried. Have you tried it? What'd you think? Awesome. I will leave it at that. And so one of the things we talk about with Glass is that it gives you the opportunity to get the information you need. For people who don't know, I mean, it's sort of a small computer that essentially sits over your eye. It's not right in front of your eye. It sits just a little bit up. And you get notifications, emails, you can take pictures, video, social media, news, all kinds of things come in there. It's not that different than a lot of what comes into your smartphone. The hope is, in many ways, sort of the inspiration of what some of the Glass team thought about, is that you can get that information, and if you don't need to do anything about it, if you don't need to respond, or if you don't want it to be a part of your life, you just either swipe it out of the way or you just don't respond. Some of the studies that I've looked at say that the average person takes out their smartphone 75 to 100 times every day just to look at a notification, or you're wondering if somebody sent something, or has this happened yet? And it becomes sort of a mindless sort of a habit, and the reality is that we just all do it and we're not even thinking about it. And how much of that time is really useful, and is it just because we don't have anything else to do? And so hopefully things like Glass give you that information when you need it, and then allow you to go back to something else. You can always, of course, turn it off, not wear it, etc. I realize there are lots of concerns about it, and people have lots of questions and so on. It's a new technology. People are still figuring this out. Originally we gave it to our Google Glass Explorers. So I think initially it was about 5,000 or 10,000 people who were applying it to different aspects of our life. Medical community, surgeons thinking about how to perform an operation and project that back to people elsewhere, and they'd never be able to see that kind of firsthand experience. So a training capacity maybe. Education, how do you take it and let students see what somebody is doing in another part of the world, or take them virtually somewhere and give them that really immersive experience. Lots of ways that it could be used in some pretty cool parts of our lives. Another thing that is available today, it's certainly not a futuristic thing, and I know lots of companies like Apple and Pebble and lots of others are thinking about how do we get information through something like a watch. So Android Wear is our sort of project in that space, if you will. Again, you get similar notifications that you would get through your smartphone, but it's through your watch. They work together in tandem. You can swipe an email away if you don't want to respond to it. You can sort of respond with a sort of a series of pre-created responses. I'll be late, I'll be there in 5 minutes, whatever it is. And it's something that you obviously always have with you. Now, you can make all sorts of arguments for this is more intrusive all the time because it makes it look like, are you bored with me? Like, what are you trying to get away from me? Why do you keep looking at the time, right? It can send the wrong message to people. On the other hand, pulling out your phone in the middle of a conversation is perhaps no less, problematic or rude in some ways. So, again, how do we sort of get that information wherever we are, and then do whatever we need to do effectively? The other thing to think about is the relationship that all of this, what this does to the relationship with your customers or with people in general. So it used to be when we sat in front of a, let's call it a desktop, we would be about, like 2 feet away, depending on your eyesight or your level of comfort, like 2.5 feet away from your computer. That's just kind of how we sat and how we would consume it. With a laptop, sometimes you're a little closer, maybe the screen might be a bit smaller, whatever's comfortable for you. With a tablet, it was on our lap, and arguably a little bit closer depending on what you were doing with it. A smartphone, maybe even a little bit closer, smaller typeface, or this is just kind of how we would look at it, so now we're getting really close. And then a device like a wearable, glass, or something like that. Now it's like right in front of us. You're in this really sort of intimate space with somebody. It's no longer separate. It's right in front of somebody. You're right there communicating with somebody. And the screens are smaller. So how do you condense that, whatever information people need, down to a manageable size? I think it was Mark Twain who wrote that, I would have written it shorter if I had more time, right? I mean, because writing something a lot longer is sometimes easier because you've just got all this space and you can just keep writing and it's great. But how do you get whatever you're trying to convey to somebody through a service or an app or whatever it is down into that small screen, make it make sense, and in a way that's effective? That's a big challenge. And I think that a lot of people are thinking about it. And along those lines, how many of these screens do we have? How many of them are we trying to juggle and to manage? And within the tech community, there are a lot of folks thinking about what's the best way to manage all this, and how does it affect our jobs and people who work with us. And that what we're finding, and I've talked to a number of researchers about this, that the human brain is really only capable of doing 2 things pretty well. I mean, 1 thing, great. Once you go beyond 2, you're kind of asking your brain to separate itself in ways that it's not comfortable with. That's not to say that you can't do it, or that you can't pretend to do it, or that you can't feel like you are doing it, but the brain is really struggling once you start to get into those additional screens and additional avenues of information coming in. And in fact, what they found is that about 2 hours per day for the average worker is lost due to distractions. And I'm sure we're all guilty of it. We are on the phone, and then we get an email, and what? And and you're just lost in this world of, now I'm going to check this website, and what was I doing? And it's increasingly easy to measure how bad this is for people because we can kind of see that behavior online and see what that does to people. And I know in my own experience, if I can really focus on something, and I know people at Google and elsewhere who will do this, really focus on a task, they will come away feeling like they were more productive and they got something done versus being scattered and all over the place. Plus, I think that it applies to something that I hope is still really valuable in society. And I know that we can all make different arguments about where it fits in, but that's the art of the conversation. And I use this picture to illustrate it just because there's Secretary of State Kerry. And imagine if all diplomacy around the world was just handled through email. And we've seen some of what those emails look like, right? I mean, thanks to lots of different WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, we see what can get lost in an email and, misinterpreted and all that kind of stuff. And you just get bogged down. It's just, you get stuck in these email threads and you're not really communicating what you want to say. And that conversation can still be the most valuable currency within any operation. And I can tell you that I was not good at it for a long time. I was that person who sat in my office at CBS News, and I would send an email to the managing editor, pitching a story that I wanted to do, and it just would fall a little flat. But I was reluctant to get out of my office, get away from my desk, go downstairs, sit in his office for 5 or 10 minutes, and just talk it through. And so I really do feel like 100 emails are still not worth as much as one really great conversation, and that there's so much that can be gleaned from that. And I'm not just speaking to the young folks in the room. I don't mean to call you out, but I hope that doesn't get lost in all of this, because there's a big part of that I think is so applicable. And it's not easy, right? I mean, it can be tough. Conversations can be awkward and stilted and hi, how are you? And what do you say? Whereas when you're on a device, you're very much in control, and you can be whoever you want to be. You can say whoever you want to say. You don't have to make eye contact with anybody. But I think that the real value of it, the power of it, gets lost, and that only works in person. So in case any of you need help with all this stuff, by the way, there's a section in the book called Revitalize, which is all about sort of outsourcing our time management and our attention to technology, because there's actually quite a growing industry around of technology helping us manage our technology, believe it or not. And so there are apps. There's a program called Rescue Time, which will actually prevent you from going online at certain parts of the day if you need that. There are ones that will like Concentrate, and others that will ask you to take a break every 25 minutes. So for 25 minutes, you're online, doing whatever you need to do, then take a 5-minute break, get up, walk around, look around, whatever you want to do, and then come back in. And all of this is based on similar studies in terms of productivity and multitasking and how we do these things. But it all goes back to, none of us are robots, none of us are able to do this stuff 24/7, and we have to make choices with our time throughout the day. And I've had small business owners who will say to me, well, look, this is all well and good, I love your message on all this stuff, but the reality is I need to be available to my customers at 9 o'clock at night. They want to email me, they want me to be available to them. I've got a lot of work to do, and this is the choice that I make. And I say, well, fine, it's totally up to you. But if you notice that your wife is getting increasingly frustrated with you, and your kids are upset because you're not available at night, and you get depressed about that, and you can't sleep, and the next day your job suffers, and then you're tired, and you're angry, and you're just frustrated, well, maybe you need to change what you're doing. And so all of this has kind of a ripple effect across what we do. From my standpoint, within the sort of digital diet philosophy, if you go online and search for digital diet, The Telegraph, which is the paper based in the UK, they created a nice interactive where you can kind of punch in your own choices and behaviors and how many smartphones do you use and logins and passwords, because it's all based around what I call the virtual weight index. So this is the weight that you can't see, unlike the body mass index where we all look and see if we're supposed to be in good shape, and this is supposed to help us understand that. The virtual weight index allows you to think, all right, well, I kind of do have 2 laptops, and I do have 6 social media profiles, and which ones am I really using and to what effectiveness? So that can be a way to just see it in black and white. So I'm going to wrap up thinking about the future of technology and transportation, and how this also plays into the way that we consume it, which I think is a way that, which is something that applies to many of us. And I use a sort of a jokey slide to make what I hope is a slightly serious point. I actually interviewed a father once whose son was killed by somebody who was texting while driving. And so this woman, who was the one who struck the vehicle that his son was in, she wasn't messaging her boyfriend or something that maybe we feel is just cavalier and not worth her taking her eyes off the road. She was messaging her church, of all things. It was a fundraiser that she was helping to organize. And she felt like that was important, and she needed to respond to this person while she was driving. And within a few seconds, she'd gone from that moment to having killed another human. So it's, those kinds of things can affect us in ways that we don't even think about. So what's happening in that space? Well, I have good news. And I'll tell you this by way of a quick story. I happened to be at the first DARPA Grand Challenge, which took place 10 years ago, roughly, 2004. This was in the competition was created by DARPA, and if you don't know DARPA, and for the young folks in here, if you don't know DARPA, look it up. They were responsible in many ways for the sort of precursor to the consumer internet and what we know today. They weren't even thinking about broadband, let alone just being connected and getting information to different corners of the world and of the country. But they do a lot of other things. But back in 2004, they said, all right, we've got $1 million. We're going to give $1 million to the first institution, academic institution, that can get an autonomous vehicle, a self-driving car, from, it was about 100 and some miles, from Barstow, California to Primm, Nevada. So all of these institutions and universities and colleges, Carnegie and Stanford, and some of them were from different parts of the world. They're very excited, $1 million. Like, we can do this. We've been working on autonomous vehicle technology for a while. Let's do it. And so, there you can see the map of where they were going to go, $1 million. They had these tricked out vehicles. This is the Red Storm from Carnegie Mellon, which is awesome. And they had a Cajun bot from the University of Louisiana. And, you put like scientists and cars and technology and all in the same room, and it was like, how many people have been to a NASCAR race? A few people. I've been to Talladega. This was like NASCAR for geeks, right? I mean, it was like awesome. The enthusiasm, people were like, this is great, this is the future. Wow, can't wait to see where this goes. So I remember the morning that they went to, it was like and it really was like a race car environment. Everybody had their pit crew, the different parts. It was all set up, and so they lined up. There were about 24 of these cars all ready to go. And does anyone remember who won? Anyone know? Hazard guess? Well, the answer is that nobody won. That's because the furthest anybody went was about 12 miles. So that's about a 10% success rate. And that was the Carnegie car. Most of the cars either caught on fire, went backwards, crashed into something else, didn't go anywhere. There were a lot of stressed out scientists running around that morning. And I remember afterwards, everybody's kind of like, well, I guess we're a long ways off from autonomous and self-driving vehicles, I guess back to the drawing board. Darn it, what are we going to do? Well, fast forward to the next year, DARPA held another grand challenge, and actually a few of them finished it. And then the next year, most of them finished it. And they did an urban grand challenge, which meant they had to do it in streets now, not just in the desert where you weren't necessarily going to kill anybody. You need to think about, these are important things to think about. And they were able to complete that. So skip ahead to kind of where are we at today. And again, I know I come at this with some bias working at Google, but self-driving cars and where those are at have evolved dramatically in 10 years. To the point where you see how far, and the numbers have gone up even since I created this slide, but now we're at 700,000 miles that have been driven just with the Google cars. And I know there are other companies in this space, so I don't want to pretend like we're the only ones thinking about this. But so you go from like 12 miles success rate to 700,000 in 10 years. That's incredible. And of those 700,000 miles, I had heard, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure the only time there was an accident was when a human took over and was driving. So they have to think about all kinds of things. These cars make, I think, 15 decisions or more every second about where to go. Cameras, lasers, radar, GPS, what's around it, where is it going? It's fascinating stuff. I won't get too much into it. If you're really interested in it, there are lots of cool YouTube videos that show kind of the processes and what they're doing to be, and safety is the top of mind thing with this project. But the point is that a lot of us are distracted by information and by technology when we're in our cars. It is perhaps one of the places where we are most at risk to tipping that balance one way or the other. So what's cool, I think, is that this is a real opportunity to help to mitigate some of that. And I know that the team is thinking about this as well. So it's safety from a driving standpoint where human beings just make mistakes, but it's also minimizing distraction. So the latest prototypes, which you see here, they actually have no pedals and no steering wheel. So you're actually not able to do something dumb anyway if you wanted to. And it's a totally different experience. There's video online if you want to look at how people react to getting in these cars. It's a little bit Jetsons-like. They're sort of like, what do I do? And the answer is whatever you want, except for driving. And some people, there was a mother there who said, this is great, I get to spend more time with my kids. Normally if I'm driving, it's like, shut up back there, and it's like just annoying to be with your kids. But what if you could sit with them and read with them or talk to them? It becomes like a place to hang out as opposed to this driving with the kids again. And believe me, I know, I have 2 small children. I wish it was a self-driving car. So all of this is to say that there are lots of ways that we're thinking about this, and that getting there is not always easy. So getting from 2004 self-driving cars to 2014 has been a massive undertaking. I can't possibly summarize what they've been through, what the teams have been through. This is a gargantuan project, but I think what's cool about it, and how many people in here are gamers? Nice. Me too. And so this is a friend of mine, Jay McGonigal, who talks a lot about game theory and how it applies to real life and gamification and a lot of that we see these days. And what's interesting is that gamers do spend most of their time failing. Your character dies, you can't get to the next level, you can't figure something out. It's a constant process of problem solving and trying to evolve and do better and be better. So for all the parents out there who are worried that these kids are just wasting their time, they are. No, I'm just kidding. No. But a lot of what they're doing and experiencing does lead back to this, that overcoming something and not being afraid to take on a big challenge and seeing an obstacle and trying to get around it or through it or past it or something like that, that they really, I think, value that and thrive on that. And I know that growing up, this is a big part of what appealed to me. So I'm going to finish up because I'm running out of time, but I'm going to finish up with a few tips that I feel like hopefully will apply to everybody in this room. The first one is I ask you to think about phone stack. So you could actually be doing this right now, but I won't ask you all to do it. Next time you have a business meeting or you're out with friends, particularly, it could be friends or a business meeting, ask everybody to stack your phones up in the middle of the table, okay? And the first one who pulls their phone out before the meal is over has to pay the bill. And see what that does to sort of the dynamic of the table and the discussion. Is it weird? Do people annoyed? Is it kind of nice? Is it boring? Right? I mean, who knows? But see what that's like and see what it does to that. I'm not suggesting you do it all the time, but maybe just see how it goes. The other thing, and this is something that our team and the team that I work on at Google deals a lot with, empowering journalists. I don't work on the PR team, but we think about the future of technology and whether it's access to technology like sort of broadband or internet and that kind of thing, slightly to a lesser degree, but how do journalists use digital news gathering tools to better tell stories to people? So that's what our team does. And our team, whenever we have somebody presenting in the room or some people are talking, at the very least, people close their laptops and focus on the discussion. Now, not every team is like that, and I'm not suggesting every office should be like that, but I will say that from my experience, it's really interesting what happens. People have better, more thoughtful comments. They're more present. They listen better. You bring out the best in people, and you sort of nurture people who would otherwise perhaps be uncomfortable presenting or bringing out an idea if everybody is at the same level. Because I think that the intimidating part when you sort of raise a point in a meeting is not so much that you want to say something, but when you're looking around and everybody's like, you think, does anybody care what I'm saying? But if everybody in the room is looking at you and you feel like you have their attention, I think there's an element of respect there that can elevate any operation in any office. And the last one is one that I personally adhere to, and that is no charging your smartphone in the bedroom, which I feel like I don't have to state the obvious about why that would be helpful, but it can lead to better intimacy. I'm just going to leave it there. I know with my wife, she had a nickname for me for a long time, which was Glowworm, because my face was always illuminated by some kind of screen when she would come in at night. It was just like whatever it was, oh look, Glowworm was up again, right? And so it was just a distraction. It's just like a piece of metal and plastic between like your spouse or anyway. But furthermore, I think that it can help us with a little bit of separation from that stream of information. Just, I don't know how big your house is, but I'm guessing you can probably get to your phone wherever you charge it in like less than a minute. I mean, if you had to get there, it's probably not that far away. So you don't have to feel like you're totally disconnected. I did have one guy say, it's different when you have teenage kids. I need to know, like if they call, it's got to be right by my bed. I understand everybody's a little different, but if you like charge it in the kitchen or the bathroom or like anywhere else, maybe it will give you that little bit of breathing room in the morning and at night some permission to just kind of like disconnect for a while. I know it used to be like no television in the bedroom, but now I feel like maybe no smartphones or devices. So anyway, whoop, skipped ahead. So along those lines, the lasting message that I want to leave here, whether it's broadband connections or connections with human beings, love your technology, just not unconditionally. Think about what you're using it for, how you're using it, how effectively to use it, and feel like you're doing it in a way that benefits you. So this is a little bit about me. If you want to look up more, and I want to thank all of you for the time that you've taken this afternoon to listen to me. And I've seen your faces, no tops of heads, so I'm impressed. So thank you all. Thanks. Yeah, happy to take questions.
We got a mic in the back. We've probably got time for a couple of questions. Anyone?
I'll bring the mic over.
Hang on just a second.
Sure.
We got it right here.
Hi, my name is Ann Byers, and I'm working on the state broadband plan. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow. And one of the issues we identified was the need for an IT workforce. So could you talk a little bit about Google's Made with Code initiative?
Oh.
If there's any way we could partner with you?
So I only know about Made with Code tangentially because of, I know a couple of the folks who work on that team. So I can't speak about it with any type of authority. I will say that for people who don't know, it has focused, I think, a lot on young women and women to get them thinking about becoming a coder, thinking about, what does this mean, and also teaching it or instilling it as something important through sort of non-traditional means. So, through games or through music, understanding kind of how it's a part of our lives in a way that's not obvious. You don't just sort of sit somebody down in front of a computer like, hey, now we're going to learn Python. It's like, what is Python? But understanding kind of how that fits into our lives and the importance of code and how it's a part of everything from the apps that you use to checking in at the airport or whatever it is that applies to your life. As far as partnering with them, I honestly don't know the easiest way to do that, but I know that they've got a pretty robust presence online, and if there's some channel to get through them that way, and otherwise I can do what I can. So, yeah, sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
As a former newsman, I'm interested in your thoughts about, I get most of my news now from Twitter and on Facebook, and occasionally then I'll go to the newspaper, or I hardly watch television news anymore.
Yep.
How do you see technology changing the whole news industry? And kind of a related thing, I'm interested in how you see drones being used in the news industry.
Two great questions. Wow, it's great for me to have an opportunity to talk about this stuff because that's what I talk about most of the time. I actually just got back from a conference in Chicago called the Online News Association, which is probably one of the biggest and most respected tech, journalism, future of news conferences that happen in this country. And I would say if you polled the journalists who attended there, and there were probably a couple thousand, most of them would say, yeah, I use Twitter to get my news most of the time. And, I know some folks on the Twitter news team, and I would consider them to be contemporaries and so on. The reality is for them, part of it is just they're like gnats with their attention span. They want to get things quickly. Twitter does a great job of kind of just constantly streaming information in there. I've heard the folks at Facebook argue that it's a little more curated based on your friends and your family as opposed to people you want to follow in the news industry. I won't do a pitch for Google+, but I do think people sometimes get their news from their Google News. Lots of ways to discover it. I think that people's behavior, two things are happening. News organizations are thinking differently about what news is. Is it a service? Is it something is it just content? What is our distribution platform? Legacy news organizations have been criticized for not moving quickly enough, adopting a mobile strategy. There are outfits like Quartz. Al Jazeera just launched a mobile network that's entirely focused on people on smartphones. CNN Go just launched recently. Lots of ways of trying to get to people whenever they want it. I will say that there's an increase. What's nice is the quality of it is not being lost, I hope. And I think that that's one thing that I came away from this conference is that people still care about, what goes into the production of this, that yes, it might just be a data set, but what's the value of it? And staying a little too much, trying to stay away from kind of the lists, or called listicles, or top 10 ways to find your favorite vacation spot. Like, it just gets distilled down into something sort of meaningless. So hopefully that isn't lost in the kind of like pursuit of getting it down to smaller screens. And as far as drones go, I mean, gosh, I was messing around with a drone with some colleagues of mine at Google recently. I mean, they're amazing. If you haven't seen what they can do, the control you have with them. I think the most recent example is in Hong Kong. And so there are people who are using drones to actually capture aerial views of the protests, at least until they get shot down or something. But it's a way to get a perspective on an event like that where people tell you that, 20,000 people protested in Hong Kong today. And it's just an abstract number. I mean, if you've been to a football stadium, maybe in your head you can kind of imagine. But if you can see the streets of Hong Kong crowded with people and this drone kind of quietly flies overhead, it's powerful stuff. I mean, I've seen people using it for environmental stories to show climate change in an area where they would have a hard time showing it otherwise. But there's this clash between the FAA and regulating them, and which news organizations should have them, privacy, all this stuff kind of coming to a head right now. But I think it's a fascinating area of news gathering that we're just seeing like the tip of the iceberg right now. So.
One more over here.
If there was a solar flare, what would that do to like Google self-driving cars?
Well, hopefully nothing, and probably nothing. I mean, solar flares, I think we've all had days where we feel like there must have been a solar flare because we're like, man, it's so hard to get online right now. And the reality is that the sort of, geomagnetic force that comes out of a solar flare can have an effect on communications. I think that the team is thinking about all sorts of contingency plans if something were ever to happen. And these are also, at the moment, not sort of networked cars between each other. And they're not solely dependent on one type of navigation technology over everything else. There's a way of, it's a suite of things. So even if it knocked out a couple of satellites or something, there's a lot of redundancy built into all of this stuff. So I know it's a serious question, and they're taking it seriously. So I personally am not worried about it. If a solar flare blasted off and hit the Earth, then we probably have way bigger problems to worry about. But yeah, it's something they're aware of. So yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
All right.
So much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.